Hi, I'm Chuck Gilmore with Power to Sing Live, and I'm tuning in a few minutes early today in our pre-show show. How's everybody doing? I want to be able to say hi to those of you who join early. Um, so today is live program number 76, which is amazing. We've now been, what, 52 weeks plus another 25 or something like that, or whatever it is. And so it's been over a year we've been doing these live streams. I hope that you've enjoyed them. And let me just put up my little overlay here so you can see who I am and we can have a good time together. Hello, everybody that's joining. Nice to have you with me today. Um, I Anakam, Anakam, I'm not sure how to pronounce it in your language, but that's the way I can barely read it. Omkar, hello, nice to have you with us today. And Biswa, Biswajit, love singing. Biswajit, nice to have you here. I love singing too, and I am fine, thank you. So thanks for joining me today. Just give me a sign that if you can hear and see me okay, then let's just let me know that for sure. I want to make sure that everything is okay uh, and that you can hear and see all right before we get started here. So how's everybody doing? We're going to be talking today about flip falsetto. What is the vocal type flip falsetto? And it's a little bit on the I think this is one of the most confusing vocal types that there is, and we'll talk about why it's confusing. But I one of my favorite examples of flip falsetto is the Tarzan, and that, for those of you who are out of country, great. Thank you for letting me know. You can hear fine, and but when I was young, there was a program called Tarzan, and one of the early Tarzans was a man named Johnny Weissmuller, and he was an Olympic swimmer that they hired to be Tarzan, and he had this really great Tarzan call, which was kind of oh, and he would do that, and he'd do it really loud, and all the elephants would come running to help him, and he could talk to the animals with that sound, and they'd hear it all throughout the jungle, and all the elephants would come charging in to get the bad guys and help Tarzan. Anyway, I thought it was really cool, and anyway, that's a pretty good example of what we're going to talk about today. So, how's everybody doing here? Marion, hi, nice to have you with us today. Great to have you join us. So, probably you ladies so far, maybe can't quite relate to what us guys go through when we go through puberty, when our voices start changing, when we're anywhere, around 12 to 13, 14 years old. Usually by the time 14 hits, we've at least started going through. I had a son who was, I think he was in ninth grade, so he may have been 14, and his voice was still rather unchanged, but it caught him that year, if I remember right, and his voice started changing. I don't know if you guys can, Marion, I don't know if you can really relate. Now, Marion, when I say Marion, I know there's some men who are Marions also. Don't know whether you are Marion male or female. But anyway, guys, the ladies can't really relate to waking up in the morning and saying, one day you're in your normal young boy's voice. And the next morning you wake up and say, good morning, good morning. Something's happening here. And then you'll be talking along in school, and all of a sudden it'll crack and break. Al, hi, nice to have you with us today. Can I recommend you a good singing technique book? Sure. Singing for the Stars. Singing for the Stars. Author is Seth Riggs. And I just spent some time this morning reviewing some of the pages of Singing for the Stars. It's profound and it's simple. It's profoundly simple. And I continually am amazed at what that book has. So I'd recommend wholeheartedly Singing for the Stars. And there's another book called The Voice of the Mind by a guy named Cesare. And that one's an older book, and it may be hard to find. It's pretty expensive. Singing for the Stars you can find on Amazon, and it's not very pricey at all. Marion, female. All right. So Marion, you haven't gone through the vocal change that us guys do, and it leads to this flip falsetto that I'm going to talk about today. I haven't seen Seth now for a couple years. My last meeting with him was in May of 2016, and we had a week together. I had some lessons with him on Skype later that year, so probably haven't seen him for 2017. It'll be 2 years probably this June, and I haven't seen Seth. But I have a friend who was with him in Indonesia, and they were down there teaching actually a performance camp with his spouse, Margareta. And from what I understand, Seth Riggs, who is 87 years old, is doing great. His health is really in good condition, and he's still teaching, and he still teaches very effectively and very efficiently. So Al, I don't think you could go wrong with Singing for the Stars. All right, it's top of the hour in Utah. It's 2 p.m. Don't know what time it is your time, but it's top of the hour. So welcome. This is Chuck Gilmore with Power to Sing Live number 76, and today we're going to talk about what is the vocal type flip falsetto. Flip falsetto has so many different meanings to different people. So I want to get into that a little bit today and talk about flip falsetto. And I started talking about this with some of you in the pre-show show. But for guys who go through the vocal change at puberty, where their voice begins to drop, we inadvertently experience some of it. When our voices are changing, we'll be talking along, and then all of a sudden it'll do that little well, that's a flip, momentary flip, and it's a momentary falsetto. And I actually served I was a missionary for a period of time, 2 years in California for my church, the Mormon Church, and known as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And when you're 19, when I was 19, you had the opportunity to go on a 2-year mission, and I was called to California, and I spent 5 months in Santa Barbara, which is the garden spot of the world, and just beautiful. But we lived in a jockey's quarters of in a barn on an orange ranch, and right outside my window was a donkey. We called him Fred. I don't know what his name was, but we called him Fred. Every morning at about 6 a.m., he would go, Now that I look back on it, I think a perfect example of flip falsetto or breaking into falsetto. That was Fred the donkey. And believe me, he was consistent every single morning about 6 a.m. and literally right outside the window of my little bedroom that I had. And it was very fun. Yeah, it was very entertaining, and we liked Fred. So that's kind of what falsetto or flipping into falsetto can sound like. Some of you may be familiar with it in the definition of a yodel. So Fred the donkey was yodeling right outside my window every morning for 5 months. Ah, yeah, yeah. Johnny Weissmuller, the Tarzan in the early days of the Tarzan series. Oh, he did that little thing and called the elephants to come and help him beat the bad guys. Anyway, flip falsetto. Let me just say hi to a few folks. Um, say, so, Biswajit, Biswajit, who loves singing. I did a number of times. I am 27. I still have that momentary flip falsetto. It happens, doesn't it? When I suddenly try to speak in a deep voice and end up embarrassing myself. Yeah, it it's crazy how that just can sneak up on you like that. Hey, Subia, nice to see you. Nice to have you here. Ricardo, great to have you join us. Subia, you're not too late. It's only 4 minutes after 2. You missed the pre-show, but um, that was just 7 minutes or so. Janet 2A. Janet, nice to have you here. Janet says, I came to this today after receiving diagnosis of flip falsetto after doing the test. However, my SpeakPipe message from you said, full chest, high larynx. All right. This is perfect, Janet. I'm very happy you're here. We're going to talk about this. This is such a great intro into what I want to really address today. And that's one reason why flip falsetto is so sometimes confusing. So, Ishan, Tiku, nice to have you here today. Hi. Okay, so Janet 2A. Janet, I'm just going to say Janet. What she's talking about is my website. Most of you have seen it. So if you go to my website, you can take a vocal test. So you scroll down the home page and you see something there that says the power test, and you slide down into this area in the middle of the page, and you can record your voice doing a vocal test. And then after you get done with that, you slide down into this other area here, and I'm guessing that's probably a little bit, I apologize, it's probably a little bit difficult to read. But there are questions that you add. So you record your voice taking the test, and it sounds like, for the ladies, they start on middle C. And you go through the bridge of your voice, and then if you take the quiz, you can answer the questions here. And a lot of people will actually send me they'll send me a copy of the recording. So when they answer the quiz says, well, what happens is they listen to it and they hear this little crack. And Janet, you have to tell me if this is what happened to you. You could hear a little flip or a little crack. And it cracks. And so when you answer that question on the computer, that you actually had this sudden break or sudden interruption in the tone quality, it's going to signal that it was a flip falsetto, and you'll very likely get that as your vocal type because you did flip into falsetto, or at least you cracked or broke for a moment at least. And so the only challenge with the computer test, the quiz, is that it can't, the computer can't tell. It would be an unfair question for me to have this question: why did you flip, or why did you crack? And then there's not a yes or a no to that. The computer can't hear why you broke or cracked or flipped into falsetto. And so many times, Janet, many times the flip into falsetto is caused by a pulled chest high larynx. I'm going to go into that a little bit more in a minute. Okay, so it's not necessarily uh, incorrect. You certainly, I'm sure you did flip into falsetto. The question is, why did you flip into falsetto? And that's what gets to the foundational um, vocal type that we are. So I'll delve into that a little bit more. Let me just say hi to a couple other people here. Um, Ricardo, hi. Had the same experience as Janet in the vocal test. Good. So this is going to be helpful. I'm glad you're here, Ricardo. Um, Subia says, well, I can't flip falsetto. I mean, I can, but not often. I find it difficult to flip. I don't know why. You know, sometimes it is hard to flip into falsetto. I have some students that I've taught in years past that had real difficulty getting into falsetto. I mean, I actually wanted them to because they were so tight as they went up higher and higher, and I couldn't get them to like experience some release in their voice. And I actually was kind of hoping they could break in the falsetto just to feel how easy head voice can feel. Very similar feeling. And I found that there's some students, Subia, that really have a hard time finding that flip, that ah. So, okay. Omkar says, while doing flip falsetto exercises, I connect, but while singing, I don't fall in continuous falsetto, but it still sounds like a bomb blast, so loud, earth-shattering voice, like earth-shattering voice. Actually, I'm a beginner. That's okay, Omkar. Many of us have been through the same thing. So let's talk a little bit about this. So first of all, let's break down. Maybe this will be helpful. So we talk about flip. There's also kind of the word break. We use the word crack sometimes, and we use the word falsetto, and those terms can kind of be confusing. So if I were to say, and maybe they're a little bit, people could define them differently. I'm not saying that this is the only way, but this is the way I look at it. This is the way I define it. If I were saying, I might have that little bit of there's another term, like a little road bump in the middle there. But notice that I didn't completely disconnect, or at least if I didn't, it may be cracked a little bit. I reconnected. So I would call a crack a momentary interruption of the tone, but one that reestablished itself. There's a little bit of a crack there, but maybe you could even say if it was complete, like a complete break. So I would call that a complete break if I don't reestablish the tone connection. It's kind of just a way to distinguish between, a crack and a break. A crack, in my mind, is just something that's kind of momentary, and you reestablish your footing. You get back into the tone. It reestablishes the tone. But a break, in my mind, implies, now I have broke, and the tone hasn't been reestablished. So you could also call that a flip. So I could go from a connected tone to a disconnected tone. You could call that a flip, or you could call it a break, because I'm not reestablishing the tone. I've remained in what would be falsetto. Okay, so that's the other term, the falsetto. Falsetto doesn't blend into the chest voice, and so you have to clunk back in the chest. That's why it's not too useful. One reason why it's not too useful. So there's some of the terms that I use when I hear a crack. Um, it might be just a momentary kind of disruption in the tone. It's not what we want, but that's a crack. For me, a break is and it just breaks, and then that would lead to, if it never reestablishes itself, now I've flipped into falsetto. And falsetto, of course, then is a disconnected tone. So with that kind of backdrop, what let's talk about then. Well, let me just stop and say hi for a minute and see if there's some other questions that I can try and get to that's kind of on topic. I appreciate the good questions you guys are asking. Subia says, so what's the reason that I'm not able to flip? You know what I think, Subia? I don't think you don't press in hard enough to have it present. That's one possibility. That is, in other words, if it's light enough, then it's harder to flip. If it's a lighter adducted chord, if the vocal cords are adducted. So if you're still working on trying to get the cords more firmly adducted, and in other words, your vocal type being light chest, no chest, then it's pretty hard. It's sometimes already kind of in a state of a disconnected tone already, because the chords aren't coming together as firmly. I'm not saying that's what you're doing, but I would wonder about that. Other reasons why people can't flip into falsetto, I don't really know. There's just some guys that I've worked with who simply can't, have never experienced falsetto. They've never experienced that break in their voice. Okay. Yeah, head voice is very easy, but flipping falsetto isn't that easy. Okay. That's her other comment from Subia. Vivi, hi, nice to have you with us today. Janet, really interesting to hear the reason. Yes, I do get that at EF4 or higher if I'm louder. Then I need to go to head voice. It's 9:08 here in the UK. Oh, well, thanks for the late night visit, Janet. Okay, hi Ink, nice to have you with us today. Hey, Chuck, I forgot to mention, after I do vocal exercise for 30 minutes, my voice will automatically flip into falsetto, and I won't pull up chest at all. Why does this happen? Because it'll modify the vowels, because I also modify the vowels. How old are you, Ink? Tell me that again, would you please? Biz Wajit loves singing, says, there is a song called Tiptoe Through the Tulips by Tiny Tim. Yes. Yeah, he goes into falsetto. And that example is actually on my website. And that's one of the examples I use for flip falsetto is Tiny Tim. Tiptoe through the tulips. So he's in falsetto when he's doing that. Okay, so hi Marnix, nice to have you with us today. Do head voice and falsetto blend? I think you can do that. It's harder, but some people have tried to develop a head voice from falsetto. It's very, very difficult. I would say it's probably not a very good way to do it. I've heard Seth Riggs say it never works that way. So, in his opinion, He said he had seen a lot of people try to get to head voice from a disconnected falsetto. If I can do it, but I have to really drive my larynx down. And so if I were up here, or just do it here, now I'm in falsetto. The first one was head voice. Now I'm in falsetto. How do I get back to head voice? You know, you know, when you're in that disconnected tone, it's really hard to get there. Mama, mama. You know, once you're falsetto. But what I've discovered is I can go I can really drive my larynx down with that dopey sound. Oh, it's my falsetto. And I can re-engage it. But I'm not kidding you. I have to like just really drive it down, just uncomfortably so. And you couldn't do that in a song, right? So that's probably what Seth is referring to. I'm guessing, is that you can't establish that head voice from falsetto in a song. You can't be singing along and sing, you know, come from a falsetto. It wouldn't work. So it's just better to learn how not to do, you know, not to be in falsetto in the first place. Okay, so let me just, okay, Ink says he's 20. Ink, part of it might be your age. Part of it might be your age. I found that the younger men sometimes, you know, just struggle a little bit more, so they have to over narrow vowels. They have to be careful not to sing too hard or too loud. And it just for some people it just takes a while. And those are students who are studying, you know, who are taking voice lessons. If you're trying to learn it on your own on YouTube, my gosh, I think that's really hard. Okay, so Janet says, is there not a change in larynx at that break? Tilting of the thyroid cartilage from chest to head voice. Janet, I'm not sure about the tilting of the thyroid cartilage. But yeah, when there's a crack or a break, my understanding is the larynx comes up, and so the disconnected tone is created in part by that action. You probably know more about it. It sounds like you do than I do. But from chest to head voice, obviously what we're trying to do once we identify our vocal type is to not do it. So let me back up for a second and say a vocal type is what we tend to do when we go through or when we sing through our bridge, our first bridge. So for the men, that would be the E, F, F sharp above middle C. For the women, the first bridge, this is typically the first bridge. There are some exceptions for true basso voices, and the contralto voices may bridge a little lower, likely do bridge lower. But at that first bridge, what you tend to do when you go through there is your vocal type. So for me, my vocal type is pull chest high larynx. When I tend to err or tend to my larynx tends to come up and I tend to pull. And so that's something that I've, you know, got to be constantly vigilant so that I don't default to that for whatever reason, splat a vowel or pull the chest voice. And Janet, let's take you in this situation. On the flip falsetto, there's several different ways to flip into falsetto. Let me show you two different ways. I would say that would be a vocal type flip falsetto because I just let go. I just flipped into falsetto. Now, here's another way I could be a flip falsetto. Or here's another way that I could flip into falsetto. See if you notice a difference. Could you hear what happened just before I broke into falsetto? I was pulling my chest voice higher and higher and higher, and the larynx was coming up. Crack, or a break, or a flip. So the challenge is on flip falsetto. Why did you flip? So apparently when you sent me your test, I could hear that your larynx was up and that there was some chest voice being pulled. I can't remember the details, but when I hear that, and it's not hard to hear after some years of doing this, when I hear the larynx up and chest being pulled, then you know that's the reason for. So that's your vocal type. And if you flipped in the test and answered that, the computer will say you're flip falsetto. So I don't know of another way to be able to do that quiz, because I can't. The computer can't tell you why you flipped into falsetto, and that's the point. Why you flipped into falsetto. But there are a lot of voices, Janet, and yours is probably not one of them, where a singer just lets go. They can feel it coming and they just let go. I didn't really pull up into the bridge, but I sure let go. I sure broke into that falsetto. And so that's the reason, one of the reasons why this is such a challenge. I hope that that makes sense. Does that make sense to you, Janet? I really appreciate hearing. And also, who was it? Another gentleman said the same thing. And yes, Ricardo, does that make sense to you guys, that explanation? I'd be curious to see if it did make sense to you. Let me say hi and answer a couple other questions. Omkar says, can you please demonstrate mum exercise again? Sure. One of the easiest ways to start it is say mum, 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 just like you're talking. Mum, mum, mum on the exercise, on the pitch. Mum, 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 mum. Now, when you're first starting out, it's helpful if you do a little hum on the end of it. Mum, 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 mum. Now, notice I didn't say mum, 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 mum. You hear how the vowel changed there? I kept it on Mum, 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 mum. Okay. Yeah, Subi says, I'm working on my chest voice and I need to work more. I'm sure you're coming along with that, Subia. Is Beyonce sing? Does she sing mixed? I think she does in many cases. I think she's a good singer. Janet, I am 62. Janet, 62. I'm 65, Janet. Oh, to be 62 again. So, isn't the voice developed by 18 years old? I don't think it is fully developed actually, but it's coming a long way for sure. So Ricardo says, doing exercises for flip falsetto and pulled chest, I'm now able to let my vocal folds stay more connected than before. Way to go, Ricardo. However, for the F4 or sometimes G4, I'm still in falsetto, but still breathier than before, but less breathy than before. Now, I wonder, Ricardo, if you're actually in falsetto or you're just in a very light head connection. So, because it's difficult at first to get the same power in the bridge, even though you're staying connected. So, one of the things you could do, and I'm sure you're probably already doing this if you're doing the exercises, is just that I go a little bit on the silly side of us. Really impose that larynx down. Duh, duh. And that might help you find that little bit more of a connection. You could go the other way and say, nay, 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 nay. Nay, 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 nay. Nay, 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 nay. And see if that gives you a little bit more depth of chord, vocal chord. Ricardo, so do you think that learning correctly to use head voice is a gradual process? I do. I think it's a gradual process. The exercises will certainly lead you to that, but it takes a while. It takes a while to get that balance. So I don't know, Ink, you're more knowledgeable than the myth of the larynx tilting. I don't know the answer to that question. I've seen some X-rays, and there's certainly the larynx is tilting, but I don't know. I can't remember what it is they're doing. I don't think they're necessarily singing in a mix at that point, but I know that it does rock a little bit. Sorry, hello, I'm late. Hi, Yopadios, nice to have you with us. So are they going to throw Mark Zuckerberg in the slammer, or I'm just kidding. I'm sure he'll be fine. But it'll be interesting to hear what happens to Facebook over all of that. Probably is going to be some changes there. Janet too said, absolutely correct about how I was in the test. Great. So I hope that helps Janet explain. I'm very glad I sent it to you. I will go to the Knowledge Center. It does make sense, and thank you. You know, Janet, you have not been ill-served by doing the exercises for Flip-Falsetto. They will still help. But I think that the pole chest high larynx may get to the situation faster and take care of both pole chest high larynx and Flip-Falsetto at the same time. And in reality, really, aren't we all kind of a combination of different vocal types? But there is one that kind of prevails. And in your case, it was the pole chest high larynx, which causes other things like flips and so forth. Okay, Ricardo says, yes, thank you. Explanation you provided, the reason of flipping is clear and useful. I think my problem is I tend to pull up my chest voice. Join the club, Ricardo. But that's what we're working on, right? This Wajit, does flipping into falsetto show weakness of the voice? That's a good question. The word weakness of the voice, the term, is kind of challenging because it doesn't necessarily mean that you're, so there's two answers. No, it doesn't mean that you have a weak voice. I could be very, very strong. I had a strong voice. So from that standpoint, I had plenty of strength and power in it. I just I'm unable to get to the bridge without the larynx coming up and without that crack happening. So it's not a weakness of the voice. It's a weakness in technique. And so if I can't choose my technique, if I don't have the control of the technique so that I can get through the bridge without breaking, then I have a weakness in technique. So now that being said, I have had voices where I can think of a lady who was in her 70s, and she also had a disease. I can't remember what it was now. It's related to, it's somewhat related to the systemic inflammatory of the joints and so forth. It's not rheumatoid arthritis, but something kind of related to that. And she was starting to get a wobble in her voice. And in that case, there was a weakness in her voice. And I would have called that a flip falsetto because there was just so much instability there. And I wanted to use the flip falsetto exercises for her. So in that case, this wajit, it would be a weakness in the voice. Suppose I flip into falsetto while singing a high scale song that the original singer has sang using chest voice. Will it show that I have a weak voice? Not necessarily. It just, as I mentioned, it'll just indicate that you don't have your technique down yet. Because if you can, and here's the idea, here's the concept behind this. If we have to flip into falsetto, and I'm not, there are circumstances, my friends, when falsetto is an acceptable technique for styling, let's say. And I think Sarah McLachlan uses it very interestingly in her song Angel. Is that the name of the song? And that's an example also on my website under the flip falsetto, the people who are examples of flip falsetto, because she does in and out all the time. And I think I actually find it very fascinating and enjoyable. But let's put it this way. If you can only do it that way, you are limited. If it's a choice that you make, a stylistic choice that you can choose to do or not, you don't have to do it. You can do it in straight head voice, in just head voice rather than falsetto, then you're not limited. And I don't see a weakness in your voice and your weakness in your technique. But if you have to, you can only do it by flipping in the falsetto, you're limited. And I don't want you to be limited. I want you to be able to choose and be able to control your voice, control through proper technique. Okay. Hey, Mike, nice to have you with us today. Sylvia says, any tension in swallowing muscles also cause the larynx to rise up? Yes, absolutely, Sylvia, it does. That tension on the extrinsic muscles here can begin to elevate the larynx very easily. Noah, hi Noah, nice to have you here. I just got here, so I don't know what we're talking about. You have to be sure to watch the rebroadcast. We're talking about flip falsetto vocal types, and so he says I'm a bass. Noah says I'm a bass, but head voice always up to C is C#5. Wow. Falsetto is very, very inconsistent. Is there a way to train falsetto to work consistently? No, I'm going to guess when you say falsetto, you're talking about head voice. And yes, absolutely, there is a way to train your voice so that it's consistent in your head voice. And that's what we're all really trying to get here. Just get through that bridge. We want to be able to get through the bridge without flipping or breaking. Now, the problem with falsetto, Nora, is if you're in falsetto, you have to break back into your chest. And so I never teach people falsetto. I always teach them head voice because you can do the same thing. If you're in head voice, then you've got a lot of control that I don't think you have as much of control if you have to break into falsetto. But that's what this technique does, is that, and that's the reason why if you're flip falsetto, we want to give you exercises that minimize that happening in your voice so that it can begin to get through the bridge with a blend of chest and head, and then get up into your head voice without having to disconnect in the falsetto. Ricardo says, Chuck, you've talked about light head voice, right? Can you please help me to understand the difference between this type of voice and falsetto? Yes, Ricardo, here's light head voice. light head voice will allow me to do that. Falsetto, which might sound the same, but it's not. It's a disconnected tone. It will it can't blend into your chest voice. Also, the vocal cords they aren't coming together as if these are the chords, looking at it from the standpoint of a scope. But if these are the chords, there's a little bit of air, quite a bit of air escaping through them that you don't get when you're actually in head voice. So there's a difference in terms of how much adduction, the quality of adduction that is occurring between head voice and falsetto. So so understand the difference between this type of voice and falsetto is that one tone is connected and the other tone is disconnected. Might sound like head voice, but if that's head voice, now what's that? You see, the second one is falsetto, is disconnected. There's some other differences too. You have some more overtones in head voice that you don't have available in falsetto, and I can lean into head voice. And I can back away from it. If I'm in falsetto, I can lean into it, but there's something missing. You can kind of hear that there's some overtones that just don't present themselves because it's a disconnected tone. Hopefully that helps. Okay. Yes. Now, Anakin. I'm curious to discover this vocal types. Who discovered it? You by yourself, or Seth Riggs, or someone else? You know, it's Seth. Seth is the one that identifies the vocal types. But I wouldn't say that he necessarily named them per se. But there were some people who were watching him teach for years and years so that they could teach other teachers how to do this. They gave it a name. But I think at the time when these names came out, that Seth supported the descriptions of the vocal types. So it's not me. Certainly Seth is the originator, but there were others too who were involved in, let's name this. Seth knows what he's doing and he gives the exercises that gets rid of it. Well, let's put a name on it so that we can tell other people, we can start teaching other people how to teach someone with these types of voices. Subi says, what would I do to relax my neck because I developed tension a few times. Well, Subia, I don't know exactly what you mean. Are you talking about your singing voice? I mean, I lifted weights this morning and I'm exercising, trying to get my weight down and so forth. So I'm doing some exercises with really tense neck. The other day, I kind of had a stiff neck because I moved it a certain way while I was lifting weights. If that's the kind of tension you're talking about, then a nice hot shower and somebody massage your neck and so forth. If you're talking about your voice getting tired and from singing, tired neck, that's different. And I would say that the best way to help that is to do some really dopey hooty kinds of exercises, the dopey gee and dopey goos. Do them easy, and that will really tends to relax everything. Okay. So Ink says, I forgot to mention when I sing, a lot of people say that I don't have musicality in my voice and no sense of rhythm. that it sounds like I'm speaking. Well, how do you fix that? First of all, do you believe everything everybody tells you? You may want to question that. There's always going to be detractors. Now, if you're studying with a professional teacher of voice and they tell you that, then ask them for an assignment. Ask them for some things to do that, where you can increase your musicality. One simple one is to take piano lessons. Can help to improve your sense of musicality and your rhythm. And it's an excellent way. Or study any instrument like violin or um, the clarinet or something like that, or flute. And I think that your musicality will absolutely increase. Or you can, I'm sure there's some sight reading courses and things like that you can enroll in. Ricardo says, clear, thank you very much. Yes, thank you for your answer. It was interesting. Marion says, do you use the same exercises for lyric singers, or do you use a specific training for them? Marion, fundamentally, everything is the same in terms of bridging, in terms of being able to transition easily without tension through the bridges in from chest, through that middle area that's so challenging, and up into your head voice. And to be able to do that in a easy fashion without tension or pull or reach, with a consistent tone quality and vibrato and so forth, it's the same. Subi says her voice is getting tired. Subia, I would do it on a dopey gi or a dopey gu and try and get the larynx down a little bit. It's interesting that even though sometimes I work with students who are light chest, no chest, it doesn't mean that your larynx is not coming up. In fact, sometimes that's part of the challenge that you face, is the larynx is starting to come up, even though it's light chest, no chest. So I've just been reminded that I've got a student coming in a few minutes, so I need to draw this to a close. This has been a great session, you guys. Some wonderful questions have been asked. I hope that you found this to be of benefit. Now, for many of you who, either if you're new here, or for those of you who are watching the broadcast for the first time, you might be interested in knowing what your vocal type is. And so I'm putting in the description a PDF. You can download this for free. And what I've done here is I've put links on links to every single vocal type, and examples of exercises, explanation of what it is, examples of exercises, examples of professional singers who are the vocal type that you're reading about, and then actual links to downloads for the exercises. You can just go to the description down below in the description area, click on the link, PDF, get your vocal type. You can get that download, and it might save you a whole bunch of time. So it's there for you to get, free, no charge. It might be of help to you. So thanks once again, everybody. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, I hope you will. And this week, I don't know how many of you noticed, actually exceeded 40,000 subscribers on this YouTube channel. That's like boggles my mind. I grew up in a city of like 50,000. I can't believe that we're almost as big as the city I grew up in the Midwest of the United States, center part of the United States, called St. Joseph, Missouri. Okay, so very nice to have you with us today. I'm Chuck Gilmore with Power to Sing. You can sing higher with beauty, confidence, and power. And I'll see you inside the next video. Thanks. Bye-bye.